Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on the top of page 1283. And we're talking about the dynamics of how we, neshamas in this world, souls that come into bodies in this world, accomplish and fulfill the ultimate prime mission of life, which is to draw down divine energy, but not just commensurate in expanding the containers as they draw higher levels of consciousness, but ultimately drawing down a completely new, unprecedented energy, chadash, and that goes hand in hand with the process of transforming the kelim, not just expanding and refining, not just refining and expanding them, but transforming them to the point, like he said, that the root of the keli, which goes all the way to the etzem, that's higher than the root of the energy, becomes revealed in its full power. And that's the work that we do. So the neshamas achieve this because neshamas are rooted in that place, in that higher etzem, higher than the root of existence. And they do it through Torah and mitzvahs, which are also rooted in the etzem, and therefore, when they join together, they accomplish this goal. Torah and mitzvahs is critical because these are the instruments that reveal and express the unity aspect, because Torah and mitzvahs always remain united. The neshamas are critical because they reach the highest level, as we've been learning now, because they're rooted even higher than Torah and mitzvahs. So in addition to the points made before, in the previous paragraph on page 1282, that it's Mesiras Nefesh and Ava B'chol Moedecha, which reveals the very core of the soul. That's critical because Torah mitzvahs on their own, even though they're rooted in this higher level, but it could also be, the Hamshacha could be Eris and Kelim, like he said. But when you have the Mesiras Nefesh, which means the way of the Aveda is one that's revealing the deepest core essence of the soul, and B'chol Moedecha, all-consuming love, that draws the new energy, and that transforms. That's just not just Eir and Akeli, like Mamala Kalam, even the highest levels of it, in Gan Eden and so on, but actually that the Keli itself becomes transformed to be, Helam itself becomes Gili, a revelation. And in this paragraph, he's now talking more about the focus on the Shamas themselves. For Oid, he said that the souls themselves are rooted higher, in the words of the Rebbe Rashab, Yeshleimer, the Tainug Atzmi Mamish L'mayla b'chinas Tainug Atzmi v'rotzna Atzmi to Torah mitzvahs. That the Tainug Atzmi in the Shamas on their own is higher than the Tainug Atzmi and the Rotzna Atzmi, the core pleasure and desire in Torah mitzvahs. And that the true Hamshachah Zer Chodesh Mamish is exclusively Dafka de Aveda the Neshamas Dafka. So even though the Hamshachah comes through mitzvahs, in order to awaken, to stimulate, to arouse from Atzmus Ein Sof, an Chodesh, it's exclusively through Aveda of Neshamas. And an Aveda with their Etzem Neshama, which is essentially the Mesiras Nefesh he spoke about in the previous paragraph. So here the focus is a lot more understanding the power of the Neshama, where it is rooted. Now, to explain this, we began by Inyan Hu, and I'm going to sum that up and then we'll continue. So he says, Inyan, so what is indeed the difference? If both are etzem, this is a tainug atzmi and the shamas on their own, and this is a tainug atzmi and a rotzon atzmi and Torah and mitzvahs. So what indeed is the difference between them? How do you explain it in the concept, in language that we can understand? So that's the next section, what he's going to explain now. And he's explaining going back to what mitzvahs are. That mitzvahs are Shem Havaya, oasis of Shem Havaya. This was saying, but Asi is the Havaya. And here in the parentheses, he now broke it down that Torah is the Oir of Havaya, the Oir of the word of the name Havaya, and Mitzvahs is the Kelim of Havaya. Like we learned earlier, Pnimius HaKelim. Shem Havaya is the highest name, but it's a name. It's a reflection, it reveals godliness, but it's the highest level, which is called Atzilus. And here the focus is not Atzilus the Klolus. The macrocosmic Atzilus was the Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. That's the level of Atzilus. B'chinas Shmoi. So now to understand Shmoi, he goes to Maimer Chazal, Atzilus Nivra Elam Hayahu Shmoi Belvad. So there's a Hu and there's Shmoi. And then he introduces there's Atohu, like he says, Atohu. Afterwards, Atohu Havaya Levadecha. So we're going to have now Had Ata, Hu, and Havaya. So really 3 levels. Ata, Hu, and Havaya is the name, Shmoi. In the Maimer Chazal and Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, there's only Hu and Shmoi. But it ultimately comes down to three levels, so to speak. Even though the first one you can't really call a level, just using it as a manner of expression. So what's the difference in Hu and Shmoi? So he said from earlier, Baal Leishcha Gimel in volume 2, the difference is Hu, Nister, in the third person, is referring to a level of Helam, like he says, a Helam Ma'ir that is not revealed, even to himself, it's not revealed. And I explained yesterday what that means. It's still Hamshachim in Atzmus. You can't say it's Atzmus, it's one step below Atzmus, so to speak, but it's not in the form of Gili at all. Shmoi, on the other hand, is a level of Gili. B'chinas Havaya, Shub'chinas Gili Er. And as he breaks it now further, that's Atuhu Havaya Levadecha. Ata is Atzmus. That's higher than Helam and Gili altogether. You can't talk about Helam and Gili, so that's completely off completely different paradigm. But who is Erde Sof, the Shaykh by Helam and Gili, and is the level of Helam. And he's explained not the Helam of the Gili. In other words, not a Helam that's just behind the scenes of the Gili and can just be revealed any given time. But a Helam Be'etzem, he called it. It means it fundamentally always remains beyond Gili. It's not something that's subject to revelation. It's not in that, it defies revelation. Etzem Ha'ed, he called it, which is not Gili at all. And the last piece we learned was an example for this, which I'm going to elaborate on now, how it is in Koiches HaNefesh. So I briefly explained it, but I'm going to explain it now more in detail. And then we shall continue reading. So I'm at the bottom of page 1282 and top of 1283. So what example did he give to understand this level of Hu? The level of Hu, the level of the Helam. So we're not talking about Atzmus that's beyond the whole category of concealed and revealed. We're talking about in the reality of that there's something manifest, there is an existence, you can call it a Metzias Nimtza. So there's a Helam Be'etzem and there's a level of Gili, as we shall learn. There's also a Helam of the Gili. So he gives the example of K'moel Derech Moshel. I'll read it again on top of page 1283. And here's the Moshel. The K'moel Derech Moshel, like for example, HaKeiches Heyulim Ha'atzmim Ime Yesem B'chinas Keiches. Keiches Heyulim Ha'atzmim is a level of the faculties that are not revealed. They're not even concealed, like I mentioned yesterday. Take any example. I have my hand, I can throw a stone, let's say 100 feet. The truth is, I may be able to throw it for 200 feet. Before I do any throwing, where's the koyach? It's called the koyach nelam. Koyches nelamim. It means it's there, but right now it's not being expressed. That's a helam shaykh lagili. Because it's just a matter of time. It's not going to take much. We all know everybody has the potential to throw a stone, or the potential to speak, or the potential to write. Anything, any koyach. The koyach to see, the power koyach hariyah. So you could have your eyes closed, so you're not exercising, you're not actualizing the faculty, but it's there. So it's concealed, but it's a helam shaykh legili. All you have to do is open your eye and you see. But Chassidus explains, and I explained yesterday, the Eibishter made it in a way that since he wants us to understand deeper dimensions of reality, he created the human being in the image of the divine, that you dig deeper, the koyach is not just a koyach nelam, there's deeper koyach. For example, God forbid, if a person's optic nerve or something has an injury to the eye, then even though the koyach is there, the koyach hariyah, but it's not just a matter of opening your eye. You may need more effort and even surgery or something to what? But the neshama has a koyach hariyah. Chassidus gives an example. 2, God forbid, blind people will give birth to a seeing child. unless again this child inherits some genetic flaw, some injury that is genetic to the eye. But because the koyach haneshama was not affected by the keli. So where's that koyach coming from? So Chassidus says that's called koyches hiyulim, and sometimes koyches hiyulim ha'atzmim. Sometimes it breaks it into two, hiyulim, and then even deeper is atzmim. Just for the full picture, you'll see in Chassidus sometimes it talks about this, and it says that there's koyach hiyulim, there's koyach atzmim, then there's the koyches haklulim benefesh, which is sometimes compared to koyches atzmim. And then there's one more level, the nefesh nese koyches. The nefesh is beyond all faculties. So from the perspective of the nefesh is capable of all these things. And then there's the faculty as it stands in the atzmizdika level in the nefesh. So the etzem koyach hariyah, which is never affected. In other words, everyone's power to see or power to write is intact on that level. However, when it comes down to expression, that's where there are differences. Now, different gradations. So the point being is that when you're talking koyches yulim ha'atzmim, on one hand, you're saying it's a koyach. On the other hand, you're saying harihem koyches atzmim haklulim be'etzem harihem kamoya etzem. On the other hand, they're not like a regular koyches nalomim that are just standing at the door to be opened, but they're just not revealed yet. You're talking about something that's far more on a core level. So it is koyach, but it's in a form that's like the etzem, which means it is concealed fundamentally and is not revealed. Can you access it? The answer is yes, in Samach Vav especially. And also in Ayin Beis, he explains you can access it through Yegiya, through exertion. A person can access it, or through Kabbalah soil. In other words, you need an extra power to access these levels that are fundamentally concealed on their own. And just to make it a little more palatable, the Rebbe Rashab in Samach Vav gives an example for this idea, where there he calls that the helam, there's another way to call it helam sheyeshne b'mitzias, a helam she'ene b'mitzias. It's somewhat comparable to a helam hashayach el hagili and a helam be'etzem. Helam she'ene b'mitzias means it's a concealment, but it doesn't manifest in any form. A helam sheyeshne b'mitzias means it's concealed, but it exists. And he gives an example, a very practical example, an example we can all relate to. The difference between a hot coal, shalheves kshura b'gacheles, a hot coal, and a flintstone. So both of them have the power to produce fire, right? A hot coal, a white hot coal, when you look at it, it could appear like it burned out. If you don't know better, it seems like it's already a burned out coal. But if you fan it, or I'm not talking about touching it, or you put something close to it, you suddenly realize it's even hotter than a regular flame. But it's there, it's just concealed. So that's called helam sheyeshne b'mitzias. It's helam, because you don't see the fire visibly, tangibly, but it's b'yeshne b'mitzias. It's just a matter of fanning it. If you put that coal in water, it's going to eliminate, it'll extinguish the coal. So it's mitzias. In a flintstone, you could put the flintstone in water and it's not going to eliminate its capacity to give off a spark and to light a fire, because the helam of the eish is eina b'mitzias, and the only way you can draw out that spark is not through fanning it. You can fan a flintstone from today till tomorrow and nothing will happen. You have to strike it, and hard. You strike it like a match, and a flintstone even stronger, then the sparks will come out of it. So that's called helam she'ene b'mitzias. To say it's not like another stone. Another stone that doesn't have such sparks. No matter what you do, it's not going to work. Here, it does have the capacity, but that's like an example for hiyuli atzmi. It's in there, so you can't say it's not. You can't call it that's not a koyach, but you can't call it either in any form of gilui. So you call it like kamoy ha'etzem. It's just like the stone itself. It's completely removed from gilui. But there are ways to access it. That's not here he's not interested in discussing how you access it. Here he's more interested in discussing the level that is called hu and not shmoy. That is still a level that's fundamentally concealed. So in the nefesh we have it, And now he's going to say the same thing, Lamaila. He says, U'kamoi kain, hu be'etzem ha'oir, she'ena begeder gili be'etzem. And the same thing with the etzem ha'oir that we talked about. That's not the geder of gili be'etzem. It's not in the geder of gili be'etzem. Now, yesterday I explained, I'll just repeat what I said. Why is it important to have this level? Why can't you skip this level? Why can't you go from Ato to Havaya? Why do you need Hu? Why do you need Hu and Shmoy? Shmoy we understand because you want to reveal godliness. But what do you need this level of Hu if it's not being revealed? So first of all, as I just said, it is accessible. Revealed may be another question on how it's revealed. We're going to learn that it's also revealed. The Helam itself becomes Gili. But the point being here that the main, additional to what I just said, goes back a step beyond, is also because the Eibishter wanted a full interface between us and God, between godliness and us. Now, Atzmus itself is essentially something that we cannot access, ever. But by giving Atzmus into, like he says, that the Gili is Kamoya Etzem, that we have something that's like the Etzem, that's so-called removed from us and from revelation. So it gives us some experience in the world of Gilui and Helam that at least is in our domain. So yes, it stays in a state of Helam, but it's not completely removed to the point like Atzmus itself. So it gives us a taste of Atzmus, so to speak. Which part of Atzmus? The part of Atzmus that's removed from us. Gilui gives us the part of Atzmus that's revealed to us. And this gives us a sense of the awe, the reverence, that which is beyond. But as we're going to learn, this too will be revealed because since Atzmus is higher than Gili and Helam, through Avodah and true Avodah of the Neshama, Mesiras Nefesh, and Etzem Neshama, when you reveal the Etzem Neshama, you actually have the power to reveal even the Hu, that right now we're calling Helam on its own. So on its own is Behelam. He hasn't spoken about Avodah yet. So that is the discussion on Hu. Now he's going to go to Shmoy, Havaya. So let's continue learning. I'm on the fourth line on page 1283. Now that we've established what Hu is, what about Shmoy Havaya? So he says now, Havaya, Hu b'chinas ha'oir, Gili ha'oir de Ein Sof. This is now the power of Gili, of Ein Sof, revelation. Not the power of being that defies or transcends revelation, like we just spoke about. But Gili ha'oir de Ein Sof. Rakshazeu ha'gili b'atzmuseh. However, it's a Gili still b'atzmuseh, within himself. And who, we said, is not even a Gili la'atzmai, because it's not even reached the level of revelation even to himself. Like I gave the example yesterday, let's say a mind, before it's become an active thought, a conscious thought. The idea is there, but I mean, it's only an example, but you have not yet, even you yourself have not yet really even accessed it. So this is higher than Gili. Now we're talking about Gili b'atzmuseh, where you're beginning to reveal it to yourself. You're becoming conscious and aware of what it is that you want to accomplish. So also, Lifnei Tzimtzum, you have this level, and this is the level of Havaya, Gili. But like we're going to learn, it's a Gili la'atzmei, or like what he calls now, Gili ba'atzmuseh. In Atzmuseh itself, it's the level of Gili. So now he continues, and v'zeu shekosev livadecha. Remember, he said the words Atohu Havaya Livadecha. What's Livadecha add? Livadecha literally means Atu Havaya Livadecha, you alone. So he says, Kamoi Shehu Levade. It means that even the Hu Havaya, not just the Hu, Atohu Havaya, but even the Havaya, even the Gilui, who b'chinas Ein Sof, Kamoi Shehu Levade, who b'chinas Ein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum. All these levels, we're talking about Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, there's nothing else but the Eibishter. When we say Hayo Shmei Bilvad, also Bilvad. What means Bilvad? There's nothing else. So you have to say that even the Gilui is also Levadecha, is also Bilvade, is also how it is within so-called the Godhead, within the divine that still doesn't have yet, we don't yet have another Azulas. The example being like a teacher who's preparing in his mind his thoughts, his machshava, which is only to himself. When you think, only you know what you're thinking. He's not yet begun to speak. He's not yet begun to communicate with another. So it's a gili, but it's a gili ba'atzmei. Levadecha, lifnei atzimtzum. So that's the level of Havaya. Now, so there we have now the levels. Ata is atzmus higher than Helam and gili. Who? Ata who? Is the level of Helam, the etzem. Havaya is the level of gili in the etzem. And levadecha emphasizes that all this is all within the atzmuse, lifnei atzimtzum. So that's how he's explained it. We still have to bring it back to where he wants to go with this, with mitzvahs and Torah and neshamas, but those are the levels. So before I continue, he's going to speak now, of course, more details about this level of Havaya. But you know what? I will read a few more lines and then I'll stop. V'zehu b'chinas Atzilus the klolus. And this is the level that we said before, Havaya is Atzilus. Atzilus of macrocosm is what? Is the level of Gilui Lifnei Atzimtzum. Because it's already Atzilus, but it's Atzilus in Lifnei Atzimtzum. So there's a Gilui there. But it's a Gilui to himself. And this itself now is going to explain that Havaya itself breaks into two levels. Yudke and Vavke. So who is completely beyond Gilui? Havaya is Gilui, but there's two levels. And in this you have two levels. Like he spoke earlier, if you go back to the page, he started speaking about Havaya mitzvahs. Where was it? On page 1275. So he explained the difference between Yudke and Vavke. So he's now going back to that and in the context of this discussion here. And what does he say? Like we learned before. That in Havaya itself, in Havaya you have the Yudke is the Gili la'atzmei, who is not even a Gili la'atzmei. It's not even revealed to himself. Who? But here Yudke is a Gili la'atzmei. Vavke, like machshava, like thought, like he spoke about Hanistoris la'Hashem Elokeinu on page 1275. So it's all still Chachma Bina, Yudke Chachma Bina within the Mashpia. And then he said Vavke, he says is like the level of Dibur. Which the Mashpia, within the Mashpia, he's preparing how to speak to the other. It says it actually clearly. I'm reading on page 1275. He says that. So Yudke is Pnimius. Before it goes to the Makabel, Vavke is how it's in the Mashpia. He's preparing how to give it to the Kalim the Makablim. If you read there, he actually brings Atzilus the Klolus, Yudke b'chinas era mer la'atzmei, kedem alei saratzim, b'chinas Vavke mashamer la'atzmei, b'chinas era shaykh la'elimus. Yeah. I'm reading at the end of the paragraph on 1275. This is completely consistent with what we just learned. And then he went on to say that in mitzvahs, you have both levels, Yudke, Vavke, and the Yudke is exchanged with Mem Tzadik, and the Vavke is how the mitzvahs manifest in the physical world, so we can relate to it. It's revealed. But behind that is the Yudke of the mitzvah, which is its root above, but it's Yudke in the form of Mem Tzadik. This is going to be relevant in our discussion here too. Okay, so going back now to here, so he says, so that's Yudke and Vavke. And just as it is in the microcosmic Atzilus, which I explained yesterday more at length, in the Atzilus, the microcosm that we usually relate to, Ayin Beis madregas, there are two levels, as we learned earlier. That which is concealed is Hashem Elokeinu, that's Yudke. V'hanigles, Vavke nigles, is the Vavke is that which is revealed lanu livnenu. But the shehin Chachma Bina v'Zun, Yudke Vavke, Chachma Bina and Atzilus is the Nistoris. It's still the mind, which relates to the individual. When your mind is at work, it's you and you alone. As a matter of fact, another person will disturb when you're in the middle of concentrating with Chachma and Bina. Vavke, on the other hand, is nigles, is your relationship with another. It's mides, chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, yisod. is and Malchus. That's Yudke and Vovke in Atzilus the Protis. Ukamoy Kain, and similarly, Atzilus Daklolis in the macrocosmic Atzilus, Ayin Beis Madreges B'chinas Eir Ameir LaAtzmei, and the macrocosmic Atzilus. These are the two levels: the air that radiates LaAtzmei to himself, like thought, u'mashameir LaAtzmei Eir HaShayach LaElemus, and the air that radiates to himself. But the air, he's already focusing on what he's going to be transmitting and allocating to the makablim, to the elemus. And these two levels are called hu b'chinas etzem ha'er, k'may b'chinas hahelem shalagilui. He's making it clear. He's not talking about the etzem ha'er that we spoke about earlier, which is the helem that's not shayach halagilui. Here he's talking about the helem shalagilui. That is the yudke. So that's called etzem ha'er, relatively speaking, and hispashta sa'er, ub'chinas hispashta sa'er, and the level called extension of er. So the etzem ha'er you spoke about before, who there it's a helem be'etzem, there it's a complete state of helem. Here there's a gili la'atzmei at least, but relative to the gili that relates to another, it's called etzem ha'er, and hispashta sa'er is already as it extends, meaning within yourself you're extending toward and preparing yourself to speak to the makablim, to the elemus. But now he's qualifying. So though we just made a comparison between the Yudke Vavke in the microcosm Atzilus to the macrocosmic Atzilus, however, he qualifies, but an Eidei Sof before the Tzimtzum, Beis Madreges Elu, Heimoker V'Shedish, the Beis HaMadreges, the Mamala Kalam, the Sevav Kalam. These two levels are ultimately the source and the root, I should say, the source and root of what will later become Mamala Kalam and Sevav Kalam, the energy that manifests and is immanent within existence, and Sevav Kalam, the energy that remains transcendent and above, transcends existence. So in Atzilus, the Proteus, you're already dealing with a world that has already Mamala Kalam or Sevav Kalam. In Lefnei Tzimtzum, it's still all in the godly energy before the Tzimtzum that's completely seamless and shapeless, but it's begin to take shape, so to speak, in the Eid and Sof itself, not really shape, but the concept of it, that this is the source, the root of Mamala Kalam Sevav Kalam, which, by the way, on page 1275, he said all this briefly as well. He said clearly that that's the Shedish in Sevav Kalam, Mamala Kalam, and as explains it in Samach Vav. This is on page 1275, the end of the paragraph. So it's this what we're learning now parallels exactly what we learned earlier. And here again, he's going to bring Samach Vav. Okay, so let me just finish the paragraph already. Okay. Dehine b'chinas hispashta sa'er. Hispashta sa'er is the air that's already in the mashpia, like he calls it. Mashameir la'atzmei eir hashayach la'elemus. Within himself, he's envisioning and allocating resources toward what will come later in existence after the Tzimtzum. He says, so the Hispashta Seir is Aliyas HaRotzen Al Ishtalshlos. That's already clearly, the Rotzen has arisen. We have now an active Rotzen in Elokus, in godliness for existence. Like he says in Eitz Chaim, when it arose in his will, that means there was a state before it arose in his will that actually arose, like we spoke about in the human being. You can be born, you're born with a natural desire for having a home, but it could take years till that becomes something that arises even in your mind. And then it could take even more time till you actualize it. So there's that state where there's Alois HaRotzen, Shezeo Moker V'Shedish de B'chinas Mamala Kalalman. This is the root and source for Mamala Kalalman. Mamala Kalalman meaning the energy that will manifest in existence is rooted in God's will for having this home. Remember, we spoke about Chitzenia Sa'ir. Here he's calling it Hispashta Sa'ir. This is the Ur that God is allocating to create existence. Asar Mamoris. Yehi Ur, Bereshis Bar Lekim. Yehi Ur, Yehi Rakia. That's all Mamala Kalam. Shari Baliyas Aratzon Shamu Ashara Al Esas Firis. Because in there where it arises in his will, the desire, that's where he allocates. That's the Hashara Al Esas Firis. That's where he's Ashara, meaning he is envisioning the Esesphiris, what we call Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. The Etzema and the higher level, Yudke Lifnei Tzimtzum, That's higher than that which arose in his will. It has not arisen in his will yet. There you cannot talk about 10 spheres. They're spheres and kets. They're like the artist that has not yet envisioned the Esser spheres, his piece of art that he's going to create. There, all the possibilities are open. He's an artist that can create all types of possibilities. So it's Esser spheres ad ein kets, without limit. In the Haspashtus, in the lower level, you have Vav He-h, he's already envisioning this piece of art called existence. And that's why it's the root of Mamala Kalam, the energy that will energize and create and energize and vivify existence. This level, however, is before that. This is the root, the source and root of the transcendent energy after the Tzimtzum, which is an energy that remains always somewhat above and transcendent of existence itself. As we learned earlier on page 1275, and I'm sure other pages as well. As he writes in at length, in the Drush of Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah Vav, literally he said that exactly on page 1275 as well. Also, in this Bar Ba'erech B'Drush Yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, there he actually adds Reish Samach Vav. So that's Hemshech Samach Vav, the famous Hemshech Samach Vav. Okay, so now we've established Ato, Hu, Havaya, that the levels of Hu being Helen Be'etzem, Havaya is Gili La'atzmai. In Gili La'atzmai itself, there's the Gili completely for himself, as he is aware of it, and Gili L'Zulose means he's already preparing the ground for the illness. And all this Lifnei Tzimtzum, with a comparison to the Atzilus, the Protis, and microcosm, the comparison that there's these two types of dimensions. So that's what he's established now in this discussion when he began about mitzvahs being Eisius da Havaya, Hashem Havaya. So, but he hasn't yet completed the picture. What's the level of mitzvahs? What's the level of neshamas? Which we will get to in the next paragraphs. But now, one more thing I want to say. Let me see. Well, this is going to go for a good few pages. This subject matter is going to stop at page 1287. We're at 1283 now. So another 4 pages that this is going to be discussed. And we're going to bring it all together and understanding the role of neshamas, the role of Torah mitzvahs, and the Mesiras Nefesh, and the B'chol Meidech. So let me stop here for any questions.
The Dargi of Hu that he said, the Tzurach Halomish is like a Helem she'enoi begilui. But if you're banging on it, there is a Gilui. Is this Hu?
I just gave an example from another mimer to make it a little easier to understand. It's not a perfect example. Since he doesn't bring the example, I'm not going to say it's the level of Hu. I just gave it to give an example, to compare it to the kol that is a Helem sheyeshna b'mitzias and a Helem she'ena b'mitzias. It was just my example to try to understand the difference between koiches yulim atzmim and koiches nalamim.
Okay, that makes it to understand it more. Could you say again your example that you think that makes it clear?
This is the example I have. I don't know. I mean, the example he gives here, koiches yulim atzmim. That's the Rebbe Rashab's example. Koiches yulim atzmim that remain fundamentally within the nefesh, kamoya etzem, like he says. If is a physical example, there is. If you know some physics, this may be an example that may be a level of quantum states where they're fundamentally concealed, meaning we even it's not a matter of measuring it or getting more information. They remain always essentially indeterministic and a state of probability. I mean, if you're familiar with quantum, it's a good example to some extent. It's also not a perfect example, but it's at least an example of somewhat that level of, the truth is it may be more of an example to Sfiris Ein Ketz, but it all depends how you understand it. Look, these levels are all far, far beyond us. We try to find whatever example that could help understand something a little more abstract. So I have to think about a real, maybe someone has an idea of an example that is completely like a koyach hiyuli atzmi, I still stand by the Tzorach HaLomesh because in some Vav he does bring it. And the Tzorach HaLomesh, I said also that it doesn't say anywhere that who doesn't get revealed ultimately, but you need a lot of work to get it revealed. Like Mesiras Nefesh reveals it, just like striking the Flintstone reveals it. That's what he says there. So you need to have a very great level of exertion. On its own, it doesn't get revealed. So the muscle still works. It works because you need exertion to get it revealed. Here's not talking about the exertion. He's talking on its own. The coal, the helam, the gili is there, just a helam shala gili, as I said. With a flintstone, it will not be revealed just regularly. It needs some very strong effort, and that's like similar to Veda Mesiras Nefesh. So that I would also add to the equation, and then the example works better.
I hear what you're saying, but the helam ha'oyer she'enoi b'chines gilui gam le'atzmoi, which means even with avodo.
Who said no? That doesn't say here.
It said einoi b'chines.
You'll find out. Listen, as we shall learn more, you're going to find out that the helam itself becomes gili. That's the whole point of the keli being nepach le'oyer. So it's not, the subject isn't over yet. This is all on its own. He doesn't talk about avodah here.
Okay. It doesn't sound so. Okay.
It doesn't sound. We haven't finished Ayin Beis yet. Don't worry about it. If you trust me that what I'm saying is correct, he already said it. If you learned earlier properly, he said it. If you go before, he said that the chelam atzmei nasa gili. So, but let's not go there right now. Right now, for all practical purposes, the helam is higher than any form of gili.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes. What is the purpose
the
of
the kolalmin is the etzem ha'oil. So this is already a different target. This is the etzem ha'oil that shayach legilui, right?
I just explained it. What should I tell you?
Okay.
What good does the whole concept of a Hayuli do? Could this whole be explained without using the word Hayuli? What does it add? Maybe I'm way behind, but I can't quite get it.
What do you mean? Hayuli is a description of a level that's not concealed in a way that you can reveal. It's more of a potential. Like I mentioned, like let's say a Flintstone has his ability to generate a spark, but it's like a Hayuli. It's not revealed in any way. It's there, potentially there. So something that has a potential. Like he's saying here, it's in the nefesh. There's a keiches, what he calls keiches atzmim aklum be'etzem, yulim atzmim. It's a level. I mean, we learned about it at length at the beginning of volume 2. There's a gilui, there's a helam, there's a hiyuli, there's etzem. It's one of the levels where something is already, a potential is there, but it's not been actualized. So
no, it still seems to me that adding a word that we can just say about a hidden potential, we can use a lot of words in a description and all of a sudden making up a category called the
It's not making up. But what do you mean? What do you mean? And why is etzem not making up a category? It's a real level. There are levels that are completely removed. There are levels, we learned this at length in Ayin Beis. I mean, you're asking a question.
I didn't understand it then, and I still don't understand it. I know
there are many levels. You have to understand.
Level.
I keep saying that there are hundreds of steps, of stepping stones to go from a level of consciousness to a level of complete etzem. And every step of the way is necessary, or else if you don't have every rung of the ladder. So the fact how from a seamless, shapeless soul come faculties, you can imagine there are many levels. First, it's all encompassed within the soul. Then the soul, then there's koiches atzmim, koiches hiyulim. It's just like it's a bunch of levels, one more higher than the other. Hiyulim would be, I would call them potential faculties. Atzmim is core faculties. Nelomim is concealed faculties. And Geluyim is revealed faculties. So it's just a matter of understanding that there are stages of something develops. It's just like 9 months of gestation and pregnancy. So every stage, something else is beginning to emerge. At one point, it's all concentrated in one cell. Then it splits into 2, into 4, into 8. So it's all about a process, and Hiyuli is one of the key steps in this process. Any other questions? Okay. So I'll continue learning. So the next paragraph. Now, Vihine, and now, Atzilus haprotis in Yana, ubchinas hagilui. Atzilus haprotis, what is its purpose? What is its function? It is a revelation, l'tserech ha'elim es v'nivroim. Its function is to bring out Gili Elikus, a revelation, which is for the purpose of the worlds and for the creations. We learned this idea a number of times to understand really what the role of Atzilus is, and it's in general in the Seder Shtalshlus. The Atzilus Esses Fidesu begin the Ishtamudin Bey. In Zohar he says that the emanation of the 10 spheres is for a purpose, is begin in order that we shall know him. Ishtamudin Bey. That he shall be known. Now, what does that mean? If we didn't have Atzilus, it wouldn't make sense to our minds. How can we know God, who's less machshavet tfisa beklal? No mind can grasp, no thought can grasp him. He's completely beyond us. He's beyond any structure. So how is it possible for us to know God? The Torah says, know God. You shall know him. So what God did was he emanated a world called Atzilus to create a place where godliness will manifest in Chachma, Bina, Das. These are divine faculties. These are divine attributes. In Tanya, right in the beginning, chapter 2, and then a number of other times, I think 4 different times in Tanya, he brings, when he speaks about this, he brings the Rambam, the Ramak, and the Arizal. Because there's a famous machlekes between the Rambam and the Maharal. The Rambam says that the Eibishter is hu hamada, hu ha-yidei, hu ha-yadua. That he is the knower, the knowledge, and the knowee, all together in one. So nothing is outside of him. A human being, when we know something, it's knowledge about something outside of us. But by the Eibishter, it's all one. Comes the Maharal and says, how could you say such a thing? The Eibishter is higher than Das. Lav in midus iu klal. Chakim v'lebacham. He's higher than all these levels. And Chassidus, the Kabbalah, the Arizal, the Ramak, and then the Arizal especially, reconcile and say, the Rambam is talking how it is in Atzilus. In Atzilus, the Eibishter already emanated like creating Tselem Elokim. Obviously, the Eibishter is higher than any Tselem, any image, or any likeness or structure. But he chose to manifest, like the Havaya Chassidus says, Kashem sheyesh lekeche bebilti bal gvul. Just like he has the power to create the infinite, he has the power to create the finite. The artist who can create infinite art chose and has the capacity to create finite. That's the Eibishter's koyach. Still Ein Sof, but it's the Ein Sof as he's manifesting in this specific structure. So he created the Esser spheres. He emanated, I should say, the Esser spheres. That's what Atzilus is, emanation. And they are one with him, because the Chachma of Atzilus is one, is hu v'chachmase echad. So the Maharal is talking how the Eibishter is above it all, and the Rambam is talking as it is, like he says in the Hagah in Ayin Beis, in the gloss in the Hagah in chapter 2 of Tanya, that Atzilus Yitziva Milsa, that is all that what Rambam says, yes, in Atzilus. And there he's one with his chachma. So even though chakim v'lei b'chachmi yediyah, he knows, but not with knowable knowledge as we know, as knowable wisdom as we know it. Nevertheless, there's something you can call chachma, something for us to hold on to. And what's the purpose of it? that we should have awareness of God, because if you didn't have that, we would not have a seichel that can connect with God's mind. So basically, the Atzilus is l'tzeirach ha'ilm is v'anivroim. Its purpose is for us to know and experience godliness. Earlier we learned that the same thing is with the midas of Atzilus, is in order for us to feel God, to have a hargasha of ava and yira. How could you have love and awe? So you have chesed and gvura of Atzilus. So Atzilus gives us essentially a taste of knowing God and feeling and experiencing the godliness. Ukameshikosa bepardis, b'shar shem ben dalad. There's a pardas that's called Shar Shem Dalad. Shem ben Dalad is actually Havaya, the name that consists of 4 letters. Perek Aleph. In chapter 1, he writes the Ramak in Pardes. The Inyan Atzilus, the idea of Atzilus, who b'chdei sheyedu Erein Sof. In order for that they should know Erein Sof. Without it, they wouldn't know it. They would only be able to stand in awe of it, but not know it. To know it, we need Atzilus, gives us the tools. Essentially the interface, pure interface now, the language, just like you need a translator that translates from one language to another. How do you translate Ein Sof to a world of Gvul, which is us? So you have Atzilus is the bridge, the interface that takes the Ein Sof and gives us language to relate to it through Chachma Bina and the spheres, Esser spheres of Atzilus. This is a critical piece, obviously. We've learned it many times in Ayin Beis, not for a long time. I remember going back to volume 2, volume 1 for sure. It was discussed quite extensively. As a matter of fact, you may remember the 3 meanings of sphira. What is a sphira? What's the meaning of spheres? Sphira has 3 meanings. It means mispar. It's a number. It's a number, so it's more like volume and quantity. It also comes from the word sipur, story. It tells us a narrative of Ein Sof. And finally, the highest definition is sapir, from the words like sapphire stone. It's illuminating, it's transparent, it reveals higher levels of the divine Ein Sof. And these 3 levels he explained in volume 1 are 3 ways how the spheres interface between godliness and existence. With this lowest level being more relating to us, the sipur is something in between, and sapir is when we come to appreciate the godliness like a transparency through these spheres. But either way, the spheres are the key to everything, because without spheres, we don't have faculties. Remember what he says in Tanya, Nishtalshalu mehem. Our 10 koiches hanefesh, faculties, from moichin and midas, from chachma through malchus, evolves from the 10 spheres. So therefore, the 10 spheres are vital in creating this interface for us to know God, to know the Ein Sof. Because higher than Atzilus is concealed and covered up. It's a completely concealed state from us. And Atzilus is a level of revelation that it's coming. It's a high level of revelation, but it's finally something that's revealed. Like if you think of a child in its mother's womb and it's still developing, it's concealed. It's developing. But Atzilus is when you have the full-bodied Esher Spheres, Eris and Kalim. In Akudim, for example, you have 10 energies in one container. So there's something there, but you can't say that it's a fully revealed entity. Atzilus is the full-bodied revelation of the divine structure of Meichen and Midas Esser Spheres. V'hainu, shegam Chachma Bina, which means that also Chachma Bina, shenikraim nistaris. Remember, nistaris Lashem Elokeinu Yud-Kei, Chachma Bina is still within you. The mind is your mind. If you don't express it to another, it's completely internal. So even Chachma Bina, which is called concealed compared to another, harihu gam kem b'chinas gilui. It's also a gilui l'tzeirach ha'elemis. Ultimately, the God's mind, as he's developing the idea of existence, is also for the purpose of existence. However, it's in a state that's not revealed to existence, but it's still, its purpose is part of the gilui of Atzilus. Like we learned earlier, Nachmu, this goes back, as I said, look how early back. Page 41 in volume 1. That's the Maimer of Nachmu. B'shem HaPardes. As we learned earlier, in the name of the Pardes, that talks about that, right? There's a whole discussion there, how even not just the midas of Atzilus, but also the moichin of Atzilus ultimately is for the purpose. Just like you think of it this way. If an architect is planning to build a home, so even though the contractors or the workers may not know all his plans in his mind, and he only tells them the final blueprint, here's what you should go do, they don't have to necessarily know all his thoughts and his strategies and his methodologies, but the Chachma and Bina of the architect was all invested in creating this piece of art or this creation. So though it's not revealed to others, but it's still, its purpose is to create existence. So within Elokus itself of Atzilus, you have the level of Chachma and Bina, but it's Nestaris. But on the other hand, it's the Tzedek Elims, for the purpose of existence. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop here. He's going to continue this discussion. But one thing that I want to say is very gratifying. The Rebbe Rashab is not just he could have just said the Yudke, Vavke, and the mitzvahs and the shamas. He's bringing back explanations from earlier in Ayin Beis that if you go back to these Maimorim, it's a lengthy discussion. And what's gratifying is because it makes it a lot more grounded, and it's much easier to understand where he's going with all of this. So ultimately, he's going to explain essentially the dynamics of really all of Ayin Beis, the level of the divine as it relates to existence, the level of the divine, Shmoi, Havaya, Atzilus, then the level of the divine that's beyond existence in the sense of Helam, Be'etzem, and of course Ato, which is beyond both of them. And that is going to then bring back to what we accomplish when we do Torah mitzvahs and what Neshamas introduce and what Torah mitzvahs introduces. This is where this is going. So if you remember earlier Ayin Beis, this is really tying together a lot of different knots here. And it's very, very geschmack, because when we learned that back, we're talking about now 8 years ago, 7 years ago, 9 years ago, all of that is now really being reintroduced here in this piece here. And Rabbi Rashab is elaborating relatively more than usual. Volume 3, I pointed out a few times that it's very dense. Here, he's not so dense. He's really elaborating more. And obviously, I'll explain it as best to my ability, But we're still in the middle of the concept of the Gilui, and he's going to take us back to the higher levels and what Avodah accomplishes and so on. So we're going to stop here for today, but anybody has any questions, please. Okay, so in the middle of page